The funny thing about honey is that most of us treat it like a safe little shortcut. We drizzle it on yogurt instead of sugar, swirl it into tea when we have a sore throat, maybe squeeze some on toast, and call it a healthier breakfast. It feels old-fashioned and trustworthy, like something your grandparents would approve of. But if you've ever stood in the honey aisle staring at 10 different plastic bears and bargain-sized jugs and thought, they all look the same, I'll just grab the cheapest one, there's a good chance you've brought home something very different from what you imagined. Picture this. A mom in the suburbs is making her kid a healthy snack after school. She slices apples, pours a little puddle of honey on the plate, and feels pretty good about herself. No candy, no colored cereal, just fruit and nature's sweetener. But inside that cute bear bottle, the honey has been heated until every natural enzyme is dead, filtered until not a speck of pollen is left, and quietly stretched with cheap sugar syrups. On the label, it still says honey. On the receipt, it still rings up as honey. But inside that kid's body, it behaves a lot more like processed sugar than a traditional food from the hive. That gap between what we think honey is and what some companies actually sell is what this story is about. Great Value honey is one of the most commonly purchased honeys in the United States, simply because Walmart sells to nearly every town in the country. For a lot of families, it's not just an option, it's the only local option. The bottle looks clean, the labeling uses comforting words like pure, and the price is low enough that people don't think twice. But multiple analyses of supermarket honey have shown that Great Value jars often tell a different story once they're examined more closely. The first red flag is filtration. Many samples tested had extremely low pollen counts, and in some cases, none at all. Removing pollen makes the honey look clearer, smoother, and less likely to crystallize in the pantry, but it also removes the ability to trace where the honey really comes from. Without pollen, a laboratory cannot confirm whether the honey originated in the United States or was blended with cheaper imports. Worse, it removes nutritional and functional properties, because pollen isn't just decorative, it's a natural part of honey's composition. The second issue is heat exposure. When producers heat honey to make it easier to bottle in huge industrial quantities, delicate enzymes break down. These enzymes are what help raw honey soothe sore throats, support digestion, and act as a natural preservative. In some independent tests, Great Value honey showed elevated markers that form when honey is overheated or stored improperly for long periods before bottling. The end result is a product that tastes like honey at first glance, but lacks depth, complexity, and health benefits. For families trying to avoid refined sugar, this processed honey may behave more like refined sugar than like a natural food from the hive. Now imagine someone shopping late at night, tired, grabbing groceries from Kroger without much thought. They reach for Kroger's Clover honey because the word clover sounds wholesome, and the branding looks clean and trustworthy. Many shoppers assume that store-brand honey is the same everywhere. Simple, pure, straightforward. But tests of various Kroger honey batches have shown that the story inside the bottle can be quite different from the wholesome image on the shelf. One of the biggest issues is homogenization. Clover honey naturally varies from region to region because bees in Montana might visit different flowers than bees in Tennessee. But the honey in these bottles tastes exactly the same no matter when or where you buy it. That uniformity isn't natural. It's engineered through blending and processing. To achieve that identical sweetness, industrial packers mix honey from multiple sources, filter it heavily, and heat it enough to stop crystallization. The problem is that honey isn't supposed to be perfectly predictable. Real honey tells you something about the season, the blooms, even the weather patterns that year. Kroger's version erases all of that. Another concern raised by critics is the lack of pollen, just like in the Great Value brand. When pollen is absent, two problems emerge. First, the honey's origin becomes impossible to verify. Second, the honey's integrity as a natural product is compromised. Pollen contains micronutrients and tiny compounds that contribute to honey's flavor complexity and health benefits. Without them, the honey becomes more like golden syrup, sweet, smooth, but shallow. And because supermarket honey prices tend to hover far below what genuine raw honey costs to produce, it's reasonable to question what shortcuts or blending practices make that pricing possible. People often assume that pharmacy honey is somehow safer or cleaner than grocery store honey. It sits near supplements, wellness teas, cough medicine, and multivitamins. There's an unspoken suggestion that if it's in a drugstore, it must be good for you. But pharmacy brands like Walgreens' Nice honey have earned a reputation for being among the most heavily processed on the market. Multiple third-party evaluations found that Nice honey samples often contain no detectable pollen whatsoever. This isn't something that happens by accident. Honey naturally contains pollen unless it's aggressively filtered through extremely fine mesh. At that point, the honey is no longer a traceable agricultural product. It's a sterilized sweetener. Another issue is the uniform clarity and consistency. Real honey varies. It crystallizes. It might become cloudy. It shows little specks of wax or pollen. But Walgreens' Nice honey remains endlessly translucent, liquid, and glossy, which strongly suggests high heat treatment. High heat does more than remove crystallization. It destroys enzymes. These enzymes contribute to honey's mild antimicrobial properties and its soothing effects on sore throats. When they're gone, the honey becomes nutritionally closer to sugar syrup than to raw honey. Some investigators have even suggested that certain batches of pharmacy brand honey may include blended sweeteners, especially when the price is suspiciously low for a substance that's difficult and labor-intensive to produce naturally. For people buying this honey as part of a cold season remedy routine, the disappointment is huge. They think they're choosing something gentle and natural, but what they're getting may be no more beneficial than corn syrup packaged in a honey bottle. Walk into any Aldi on a Saturday morning and you'll see the same scene across the country. Busy aisles, carts filled to the brim, parents grabbing bargains with practiced efficiency. Aldi has earned its reputation by keeping prices low, and for a lot of families on a budget, that affordability is a lifeline. On those shelves sits Berry Hill honey, cheap, cheerful, and sold in large bottles that seem like an incredible deal. To an everyday shopper, it looks like a no-brainer. But honey is one of the rare foods where a great deal should make you pause. Real honey is expensive because it's labor-intensive. Bees must visit millions of flowers to produce a single pound. Beekeepers must maintain hives, protect them, harvest at the right time, and often move them to follow seasonal blooms. That work is costly, and genuine honey reflects that. So when you see a giant bottle of clover honey priced barely above processed pancake syrup, something deeper is going on. Consumer lawsuits and investigations into Berry Hill revealed a pattern that mirrors other low-cost supermarket honeys. Ultrafiltration so extreme that pollen becomes nearly undetectable. When honey is processed to that degree, you're looking at a product that has been stripped of its natural evidence. Without pollen, you can't verify origin, floral source, or authenticity. And that opens the door to the most widespread issue in the honey industry: blending with foreign imports that might contain syrups, be heavily diluted, or come from regions where safety standards are inconsistent. Critics have pointed out that Berry Hill honey looks unnaturally uniform from one bottle to the next. Same texture, same shine, same clarity. Real honey isn't supposed to look identical all year long. It changes with the seasons, with the flowers, with the weather. When it doesn't change, that uniformity usually comes from industrial manipulation, not nature. There's also the question of value. Consumers buy Berry Hill because it's cheap, but what they end up getting is closer to a sweetener than a true hive product. Families may drizzle it over biscuits or add it to tea thinking they're choosing a healthier path, but the nutritional benefits they expect simply aren't there. The enzymes? Destroyed by heat. The small particles that confirm authenticity? Filtered away. The floral complexity? Lost in blending. the honey becomes a disguise, something that looks wholesome but is missing the very traits that justify using honey in the first place. Now picture someone shopping after a long day at work, grabbing groceries at Safeway or Albertsons. The familiar lighting, the organized aisles, the fresh bakery scent drifting from behind the counter. Up on the shelves sits Signature Select Honey, positioned as a step above the cheapest options. The bottle has a slightly more premium feel. The label might even say things like pure, raw, or unfiltered. A shopper looking for something a little better might think, this one seems trustworthy. But once again, when independent testers and consumer advocates dug deeper, the findings conflicted with the image. Honey labeled as raw shouldn't be heated significantly. It shouldn't be micro-filtered. It shouldn't look perfectly clear. But some Signature Select batches had all the hallmarks of overprocessing. Virtually no pollen, high clarity, and heat signatures that suggested pasteurization rather than gentle handling. The problem with labeling honey raw when it behaves like processed honey is that it misleads the people trying to choose a healthier product. Many consumers deliberately search for raw honey because it contains living enzymes, natural antioxidants, trace minerals, and beneficial compounds that are destroyed by heat. They want something closer to what the beekeeper would scoop from a comb, not something that's been standardized until it resembles syrup. And yet, Signature Select Honey often remains impossibly consistent from jar to jar, even when seasons change. That consistency is engineered, not natural. It comes from blending honey from multiple large-scale sources, heating it, filtering it, and turning it into a product that doesn't crystallize easily. But here's the thing, crystallization is one of the strongest signs of authentic honey. When a honey never crystallizes, it raises the question, what has been removed or added to keep it looking that way? For shoppers trying to nourish their families, it's frustrating. They spend slightly more for what they believe is a better honey. And what they get instead is a version that behaves much like the cheaper, heavily refined honeys from other chains. They lose the potential health benefits of raw honey, and they gain nothing more than an expensive bottle of processed sweetness. Subi honey has a certain mythology around it. For over a century, the brand has appeared in American kitchens, school lunchrooms, roadside diners, and family cookbooks. It's a name that feels trustworthy simply because so many people have grown up with it. But nostalgia can be deceptive, and the investigations into Subi honey woke up many consumers who thought they were buying a classic, all-American product. The biggest issue came to light when lawsuits alleged that some Subi honey contained no detectable pollen. Again, the absence of pollen is not a minor technical quirk. It's a sign that honey has been pushed through ultra-fine filtration systems that remove natural evidence of authenticity. When you remove pollen, you strip away the identity of the honey. A lab can no longer confirm whether it comes from US hives or if it's blended with imported honey. And since imported honey is often far cheaper, less regulated, and sometimes adulterated with syrups, losing that ability to verify origin is serious. Critics have also raised questions about the brand's blending practices. Honey that comes from multiple large-scale sources and is then filtered until it's clean-looking becomes a product without terroir, without seasonality, without character. People expect store-bought honey to be consistent, but when consistency comes at the cost of removing natural elements, it stops being honey in the traditional sense. The most troubling aspect of the Subi controversy is the breach of trust. This isn't a new brand with unknown practices, it's a legacy name built over generations. When a brand with that much history is accused of selling honey that can't be traced, consumers feel betrayed. They wonder, if the brand I trusted for decades isn't delivering what I thought, who is? And that confusion, that uncertainty, is exactly why understanding the honey industry matters. Without transparency, consumers are left buying based on packaging, not purity. And when even the oldest brands raise questions, it shows how widespread these issues really are. Before choosing which honeys are worth trusting, it helps to understand what good honey is supposed to feel like, taste like, and behave like. Real honey is alive in a way that processed sweeteners aren't. It thickens in cool weather. It crystallizes naturally, sometimes in gorgeous patterns. It changes aroma from year to year depending on rains, droughts, and blooming cycles. It carries tiny hints of the bee's environment, floral notes, wildflower scents, even subtle differences in texture. When honey is honest, it's one of the few foods left that still tells a story about the land it came from. And the brands that respect that story usually share the same traits: minimal processing, transparent sourcing, and a commitment to keeping honey as close to the hive as possible. Two brands in particular embody those values. Open a jar of YS EcoBee Farms honey, and the difference hits you immediately. It's not the glossy, translucent liquid you see lined up in supermarket aisles. Instead, it looks like something fresh from a beekeeper's workshop: thick, creamy, slightly opaque, with a naturally whipped appearance that feels rustic and alive. There's no attempt to force it into a perfectly liquid state, no artificial clarity, no sterilized uniformity. It looks like real honey because it is real honey. YS EcoBee Farms has been run by the same family for generations, and you can feel that philosophy in the product. Instead of outsourcing, blending, or treating honey like a commodity, they approach it as a craft. The honey is collected gently, strained rather than filtered, and kept raw to preserve the enzymes that make raw honey so prized. These enzymes don't just provide health benefits, they give honey its character. Without them, honey tastes flat. With them, it develops layers, floral highs, warm undertones, and a richness that supermarket honey simply can't imitate. People who taste this honey for the first time often have a moment of surprise. They expect it to taste like what they've always known, but instead it tastes fuller. There's depth, weight, and a natural sweetness that feels round rather than sharp. Even children can tell the difference. And unlike mass-produced honey, YS honey crystallizes naturally over time, often turning into a smooth, spreadable consistency that feels decadent on toast or stirred into hot tea. That crystallization isn't a flaw, it's a signature of authenticity. What makes this brand especially trustworthy is their transparency. They openly embrace the raw, unfiltered nature of their product, and they refuse to chase the glossy look that processed honey uses to mimic purity. Their honey looks old-fashioned because they make it the old-fashioned way. It's a brand that respects the bees, respects the beekeepers, and respects the intelligence of consumers who want something real rather than something merely sweet. If YS EcoBee Farms focuses on purity, Local Hive focuses on place. It's rare these days for a honey brand to celebrate geographic identity, but Local Hive has made it their mission. When you pick up a bottle of Local Hive California, you're tasting honey from that region. When you grab Local Hive Midwest, you're tasting the wildflowers, crops, and bloom cycles of the heartland. No two regions taste exactly alike, and that's exactly the point. Local Hive harvests honey from small and mid-sized American beekeepers and bottles it without stripping away the elements that make each region distinct. Instead of blending everything into one neutral flavor profile, they preserve the floral diversity of different ecosystems. For example, Local Hive Rocky Mountain honey has a deeper, slightly darker profile, shaped by high-altitude wildflowers. Local Hive Florida tends to be lighter, brighter, with gentle citrus notes. Local Hive Texas often carries a sun-warmed aroma from mesquite blossoms and other regional blooms. Each jar becomes a snapshot of a place. The way wine carries terroir, Local Hive honey carries bloomscape. And crucially, the brand is transparent about it. They carry True Source certification, which verifies that every batch can be traced from hive to bottle. There's no mystery about origin, no vague blend of US and foreign honeys label, no ambiguity ambiguity about what's inside. This level of traceability matters because it protects consumers from adulteration and protects American beekeepers from being undercut by cheaper, diluted imports. People who switch to local hive often say they didn't realize honey could taste so different from one region to another. Once you've experienced that variety, it becomes hard to go back to generic supermarket honey that tastes exactly the same, no matter where you buy it or what time of year it is. Where mass-produced honey feels lifeless, local hive feels rooted in nature. It honors the landscapes bees depend on, and the beekeepers who nurture those landscapes. Knowing which brands to trust is important, but understanding how to detect real honey on your own is even better. The world is full of honey disguised as honey, and the average shopper has no idea how to tell the difference. Yet nature gives us reliable clues that anyone can learn to read. The first clue is appearance. Real honey often looks imperfect. It can be cloudy or thick or slightly crystallized, or even contain tiny specks of wax or pollen. These aren't flaws. They're signs that the honey hasn't been excessively processed. If a honey is perfectly clear and glass-like, especially if it remains that way for months or years, it may have been microfiltered, overheated, or even blended with syrup. Honey isn't supposed to look sterile. It's a living food, and living foods don't stand still. The second clue is flow. Real honey pours slowly. When you lift a spoonful and let it fall, it forms a long ribbon that drapes over itself. Fake or diluted honey falls fast and breaks into droplets. This difference comes from density. Authentic honey is thick because it's concentrated nectar reduced by bees through enzymatic processes. Fake honey is thin because it's stretched with water or syrups. Aroma is another powerful indicator. Real honey carries floral scents, sometimes gentle, sometimes bold. Fake honey smells only of sugar, or sometimes nothing at all. Honey that's been overheated during processing also loses its aroma because the volatile compounds evaporate. Crystallization is one of the strongest signs of authenticity. Pure honey crystallizes naturally over time. Sometimes it becomes creamy, sometimes grainy, sometimes firm. But fake honey, especially when mixed with corn or rice syrup, often refuses to crystallize or crystallizes in odd, unnatural ways. The fridge test can reveal a lot. Real honey thickens noticeably in cold temperatures, while fake honey often remains strangely liquid. Labels hold clues too. Raw and unfiltered are good signs, but only when the honey's appearance matches those words. Blend of US and foreign honey is a red flag. Ultra-filtered or filtered can also point to heavy processing that removes pollen. Certifications like TrueSource Certified or Non-GMO Project Verified add layers of trust, especially when backed by transparency. Finally, there's the simplest test, the water test. Drop a spoonful of honey into a glass of water. Real honey sinks and slowly dissolves. Fake honey spreads immediately. It's not foolproof, but combined with the other clues, it tells a clear story. Honey is supposed to be one of nature's purest foods. Simple, ancient, and nourishing. But the honey aisle has become a place where shortcuts, processing, and mislabeling hide behind friendly packaging. By understanding which brands to avoid, which ones to trust, and how to tell the difference with your own senses, you take back control. You choose quality. You support honest beekeepers. And most importantly, you protect what goes into your body. If this has helped you understand the truth behind what's really in your honey jar, share it with someone who deserves to know too.